Things Podcast. Okay, if there's a more exciting creative voice that I have met in the last decade, I'm not sure who it would be, and that's saying something because you guys know who I hang out with. But Raymond Carr has been involved in so much cool stuff over the past few years. You're a busy man.
That's a hell of an intro, and I am. At least I try and stay busy. Otherwise, then the clowns might get me.
Well, I couldn't believe it when I saw that you were working on a movie because you always have something going on, and it blew my mind to think, like, how are you going to make a movie? How have you made the time to do the amount of work you've done thus far on Joyriders?
You gotta want it, baby.
Yeah, right.
No, I mean, look, I have. This is a project that I've had in the pipeline for a couple years now, and something I've wanted to do. So I was strategic about the time in my life when I could carve out some time and actually do this right. So yeah, it's all about timing.
And I feel like it's this push has come together amazingly quickly, because one minute I see you've built the interior of a spaceship. The next minute you've got the campaign running, which, by the way, before we get any further, I want to point out to the listeners that they need to go to seedandspark.com/fun/Joyriders, or just Google Joyriders Seed and Spark. I mean, it's pretty easy to find stuff nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this push has really been fast and heavy, I feel like. Did everything just kind of line up for you and you're like, now's the time to do it?
Yeah, it's a little bit of yes and no. I mean, the things have lined up for me several times throughout the past couple years, and I just realized that, all right, if it's going to happen, I got to do it now. Otherwise, I'm going to have to wait till next year or longer to actually do this. And I guess I should give you all the soft pitch for the project.
Yeah, please do.
So it is a movie about three kids from the hood who accidentally download an alien consciousness and take an alien spaceship on a joyride through Atlanta. So it's basically like what I'm calling it the Ghetto Goonies in space. But it also has a lot of it's an adventure. It's very much in the vein of Flight of the Navigator, Last Starfighter, like the kind of 80s, 90s sci-fi adventure films that we loved, that is more grounded and from a different perspective. So that's kind of where I'm at.
So looking at the Seed and Spark page, well, first of all, I don't know that I've heard of Seed and Spark before. How does this fundraising work as opposed to other sites?
So Seed and Spark is really interesting. It is a crowdfunding site like Indiegogo or Kickstarter, but it's specifically for filmmakers. So it's cool because you only need to reach 80% of your goal. If you achieve certain milestones as far as people following you, you get access to different kind of benefits from the independent filmmaking sponsorship programs. And like you can get workshops done on your script, you can get potential equipment. In addition to that, people can not only donate money, but they can also donate equipment, pledge things through that, as well as Seed and Spark is also a distribution website, so they actually host short films and web series on their websites, like many other streaming services. So it's a pretty unique experience that's specifically for filmmakers.
Yeah, that's got to be a huge advantage that it's tailored to provide, it's narrowed it down, as opposed to, like, you can go to this website and look for comic books or tabletop games or toys or whatever. It's for filmmaking.
100%. And they are so supportive. There's a series of workshops that you can take online that really help guide you and make you do the hard work and the smart work that goes into crowdfunding, because it's always harder than you think.
Sure.
So they try and keep it manageable on that level.
So One of the things that really interested me in looking at the page, I see the word Afrofuturism, which is, being a fan of science fiction is a concept, or a word rather, I've seen plenty of times in reading and just in being somebody who likes to absorb different kinds of information. But I don't think it really clicked for me, and I hope I'm right in this, until I saw Marvel's Black Panther film.
Yeah.
Is that a fair, or at least a fair mainstream representation of what Afrofuturism could be?
I think it's arguably the quintessential expression of Afrofuturism. Your listeners may not be able to tell from my white boy accent, but I am African American. So growing up as a black nerd, they're just, there's brother from another planet and
yes.
like the black kid from space camp, and that's about it. But so even if you just like Google Afrofuturism, there's a lot of really interesting literature that's been published in the past couple of years. And there's also comic books as well. But as far as cinema goes, there really hasn't been a whole lot. And Afrofuturism is kind of because it is a relatively new concept in cinema studies, at least in the mainstream vein. It does offer a very broad spectrum, but essentially it just means that these styles of what we consider sci-fi and fantasy, taken from instead of a European or Asian aesthetic, taken more on the lines of an African aesthetic.
And that's fascinating to me, because the idea in watching Black Panther, to refer back to that as my white boy self has so little frame of reference, just the concept of, imagine if these technologies had developed, in Africa, as you said, without that European influence, what would it have been? And I love that kind of speculative stuff. I'm very fascinated by the concept, and I look forward to seeing more of that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's also, and it's not even just like, imagine if, ray guns were made in Africa. It's more so even just the aesthetic, because our country is like European-based aesthetic, that, a Western society that is the dominant society aesthetic in pop culture. We don't even realize how much of it is European-based, Yeah. Until you see something like Black Panther, and then you just like the city skyline, it looks African, and you're like, oh, wow, that's different. And that's what's cool about it, is the fact that it is different,
Well, it's interesting, in America, and without getting too deep and heavy here, but there's so much that's taken for granted by white folks as, well, this is how things are. Mm-hmm. And I'm very interested in other perspectives, and obviously in culture and pop culture specifically, a lot of things have been happening lately that have been providing a different perspective that I haven't seen because I've been catered to my whole life, but that somebody like yourself is like, hey, look, finally, here are these things. And one of the recent experiences I've had that have kind of brought it home, I went and saw Us in the theater during the day, and the theater was probably about 3/4 full. I was the only white dude in there. And we're sitting there with the trailers playing, and I am very, very conscious that everybody in the commercials before the movie is white. I'm in a theater full of people who are not, and I'm not an overly political guy, but I am interested in this stuff, and it's not political, that's not the right word for it, but sitting there, I'm in this theater full of people who paid money to come here watch this thing, and they're not represented in what we're watching right now at all. Like not even like one dude.
Yeah.
This is how people live in this country every day, and I don't see that.
Well, no, and it's good to like pop out of your own bubble, and we all live in our own bubbles. And part of what this film is is it's partially, I'm not saying it's like a racially charged, or we're not really, it's not a movie about social justice or anything.
Sure.
But it does, by its nature, the fact that you are seeing a film that feels familiar, and that's what we're trying to accomplish, is like making this thing feel very familiar and yet feel kind of different. But in addition to that, it's also just there's a classism that is involved in this too, because most of these movies like E.T. and Flight of the Navigator, they're mostly suburban kids that have a little, maybe they're nerds or maybe their dad lost their job, but they're not necessarily dealing with systemic poverty and all kinds of other issue. Whereas these kids, I describe them like the kids from The Wire, if you watch that series.
Yeah.
Like they really don't have much of anything. And that's one of the questions that we pose in the film. Is it's a lot of fun. They're having a lot of fun playing around, discovering their powers, taking the ship on a joyride. And then they have a moment of clarity where they teleport to their basically above the earth looking down, and they basically ask themselves, okay, well, what if we don't go back? What do we got to live for down there? Like, what has society done for us? And so they kind of have this little bit of an existential conversation within each other. And at the end of the film, they end up crash landing back on Earth, and the government and the power that be have them, in holding, and they suddenly realize that these kids from the hood are the only connection and key to the most important discovery in human existence. So now they actually have to listen to them. They have to pay attention. They have to make them important.
And that's a lot of very relatable themes. And I think that's, one of the most important things that pop culture can do anytime is through relatable stories and themes and mythology deliver important messages. And there's always a balance between what is our social responsibility and what is our responsibility to entertain.
Absolutely.
And when that balance is struck, I love that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. That's Shakespeare, man. That's where the meat of it is. Like, you can be funny and you can do all this stuff, but at the end of the day, if you get a chance to reach a bunch of people, you might as well say something as well as entertain,
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's such a hunger for that. That's what you talk about, like Jordan Peele and the Ryan Cooglers and even like Donald Glover and all that stuff. They're very entertaining artists and very talented artists, but at the end of the day, people are responding to what they're saying and not even answering questions, but posing questions and all these sorts of things. So I think that's really exciting too.
Yeah, sparking conversation is, and that's some of the fun of especially Jordan Peele and Donald Glover, is so much of what they do, they put it out there, and it's not completely contained. Like, it does leave you with questions. It does leave you wanting to talk about it, and that's a key component as well.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, that's fan interaction. Like, that's what we do right now as far as content creators. Like, you're constantly like, what do you guys think? Leave us a comment, all this kind of stuff. It's all about starting conversations, and also never go to the comment section. You could just don't. But no, but seriously, like, these conversations are happening, and hopefully, people are having constructive conversations, and in addition to being entertained and everything too.
So let's talk about Joyriders itself, though. Where did this concept come from? Like, is this, you said this has been kind of with you for a while now. What was, obviously these classic movies of the 80s that we did grow up with, but when did this concept really start sort of coming together for you as an idea that you could make one day?
So I have a background in puppeteering. I'm a Jim Henson trained and performing puppeteer and an independent filmmaker as well. And so I've come up in working with a lot of awesome artists and have done several films myself. I've won awards at Dragon Con for my films as well. So I mean, there's a couple of, it's funny. I've had this idea for a while, so it's hard to really pinpoint it. But a couple of major influences was obviously, Attack the Block was amazing. If your fans are familiar with that movie.
Yes, absolutely.
And then also, I heard this story about Goonies where Steven Spielberg was a producer of it, and the directors, they built the pirate ship, One-Eye Willie's pirate ship. They didn't show the kids until they were rolling, until the moment where they're supposed to reveal the pirate ship in the film. And the story goes that they couldn't use any of the footage of the kids' reactions because they just swore the entire time. They were just like, holy shit, what the fuck? What? And so they just blew it out of the scene. And so it just made me realize, it's like, we see all these films with like these kids who are pretty good. Like, what if these kids were just not necessarily the ones that would react that way when they see an alien spaceship, that would like just cuss up a storm and just be like, not react the way that you would expect them to act, the kids to act.
They don't react like kids in a movie.
Right. Exactly. So that was the exciting part of it. And then there's been a couple of, once I had the initial germ of the idea, it was just a series of like everything I was looking at was inspiring me, and like, oh, what if those kids were there? What if that type of character was in it? What would they do in this situation? And then at the end of the day, it kind of starts to write itself once you have these very real characters existing in this world and their reactions to everything.
So you've got part of the process of creating any kind of original property, I would imagine, are figuring out the tone, how the world works, because in every movie franchise, whatever it is, the worlds operate a little bit differently. The humor is different. The physics are different. You establish your own sort of palette of the reality of that world you're building. Is that something that you've been very conscious of, or has it just kind of worked itself out as you've gone along?
It's twofold. Partially because I am a artist and I can build things. I wrote this with everything in my power to build. So if you go on the Seed and Spark website, you'll see that I shot the promotional video for it in a spaceship that I built myself. And so it has this very organic, dark texture for it. And so I knew that I wanted to make this alien spaceship very unique. And it kind of has a bit of a Geiger feel, but a little messy and a little more amorphous on that level. So I was like, okay, if I can figure out how to build a spaceship, then I can write the spaceship that I want. And then there was a thing about, okay, the ship is jumping, it teleports in and out of space, basically hyper jumping because it's damaged, and the kids are trying to figure out how to do it. So I'm going to make that the way that it flies so that when I do my plate shots, I can basically shoot all around Atlanta with drone footage and helicopter footage and just whatever, and then have the ship just appear in whatever footage I can get, In addition to that, like, they all have a psychic link to each other once they download this alien consciousness, and so they're able to expound upon exposition and, like, basically have little nuggets of information that is parsed into the conversation throughout. So just to make the whole thing a little more tighter, more compact, so they don't have to like go on these long expositional dialogue things. They just read each other's mind and get flashes of images that tells the story. So part of that is just the practicality, getting the story out there, what I could do and how I can do it with my team. And then there's the tone, like you say, and the tone has a lot to do with the characters. My initial run was, way more rated R, just in the fact that I had them talking very realistically with a lot of expletives and things of that nature. And then I was like, okay, let me pull it back just a little bit so that some people might actually watch this. So finding that tone was a balance as well. And at the same time, it starts off with a lot of fun, but then because they have this psychic link, they start to get glimpses of what the audience gets a glimpse of what their homes lives are like. And so that then shifts the tone a little bit more. So we get this more serious concept of like what it really means to be a kid that lives like this, you know. So it's really, and then it's this adventure tone as well, because at the end of the day, this whole thing is about having fun. It's about wish fulfillment. It's about having a blast, because no matter how messed up these kids' lives are, we want the audience to feel like they would love to be these kids and have this opportunity. And so finding that balance of just, you know, unabashed fun in the midst of all of this was really important.
Well, and that's the magic of all those like Amblin movies that we were talking about, is when you see those as a kid, that's what you're thinking about, is like, man, I want this to happen to me, and what would I be doing here, and what a fantastic situation. And you, after you saw the Goonies or whatever it may be, you would sit for weeks just thinking, man, I wish I could do that.
Yeah. And that's what's great about these films, because like those films in these situations and Goonies, and like, you forget about all the really messed up stuff that happened in the film.
Right.
Like Flight of the Navigator, the kid was in a coma for like a while, and like his parents got older, and he's like, all this trauma is happening to him, and like Goonies, they're like constantly almost dying and all this crap. So like, and so in reality, you don't actually want to go through that. But that's the magic of cinema, is that you do find yourself imagining yourself doing that.
Well, and it's funny how much we do sort of highlight the adventure and the magic of those movies, because going back, and I've got a 11-year-old son, and going back and watching a lot of those movies with him, I've been just like, oh my gosh, I forgot how messed up this is. And, well, in Goonies in particular, how much they curse. You don't realize, like, just every third word of that script is shit. It's amazing. And then with the whole bit at the beginning with the statue of David, totally forgot about that. Try watching that with your kids sometime, listeners. That's a lot of fun.
That's hilarious.
But so with Joyriders, everything, I'm particularly excited about the idea of everything being done in as much practical effects as possible. Obviously, that's your background, but to see that and to know, because that's, again, the most magical stuff for me, is when you see a physical thing with a presence inhabiting the screen with the actors. And look, CGI has come a long way. No spoilers, but I just saw Endgame, and there was not 1 second of that movie where I thought to myself, well, this was made with a computer.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't have that same cohesive look that practical effects have.
And there's, we can wax philosophically about why that is. Partially is because to do it right, CG rather, you do have to have Marvel level budgets. You know, it's. I mean, Sci-Fi Channel proves it time and time again how they do it wrong.
Well, and even Marvel from time to time doesn't quite nail it.
Yeah, and even like, it's so funny how hear people talk about CG, and they'll talk about, Spider-Man or Avengers or something like that, and be like, oh, that CG looks so bad, and it was like, it didn't not look bad, it just wasn't right.
Yeah.
They'll spend millions and millions of dollars to do that thing. It just didn't quite look right. So the exciting thing about this project is the fact that we are doing so much of it practically, as you said. So the spaceship is a model that we're having built, and we're shooting with a motion control camera that is being donated to us. And, we want to be able to get the things right, because it just makes that thing feel really alive. And if you don't have a solid CG budget, it's very easy to screw that up. In addition to that, all of the interactive elements of the ship, they're not just touch screens to make it fly, or like, HUD floating screens to make it go. Everything that they're doing is very analog, very textile. Like, I wanted to basically, if you remember Pilot from Farscape, he had a bunch of arms to basically fly around the ship. He had He was basically an octopus that was constantly moving and pulling levers and all that kind of stuff. So imagine that if it was just 3 kids that had to be in charge of pulling all those levers and doodads and knobs and buttons and stuff just to make it go. So there's going to be everything that they do just to make the ship fly is going to be very physical and complicated, and it's all organic too. So they're like reaching into the side of the ship, pulling out this weird black tentacle thing and like yanking on it while this other gooey lever comes from the ceiling and they got to twirl. And it's basically a giant game of Bop It. So that's one of the other practical fun things we're doing.
Well, and see, that's all very like kinetic. That's on-screen business. That's fun to watch.
Absolutely.
And the other advantage of practical is when you're dealing with practical, you know what you're getting. There's no getting to post and realizing, well, we can't quite make that look how we wanted it to look, so that's just how it's going to have to be. Like, it's done. It's there. They're in person dealing with the object.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what else can you tell us about Joyriders? What, as far as cast goes, what do you have ideas? I mean, we've got a preview video here, but I wasn't sure if anybody involved with that, if this was just kind of a teaser deal or what's happening there.
Yeah, that's just a teaser. Right now, we're going to be casting a pretty wide net. We're already working with some of the largest talent agencies in Atlanta right now, talking to them as far as casting. In addition to that, we are casting our net pretty wide, working with some talent directors, casting directors rather. So once we're up and running, we'll be going nationally for our kids. We do have the one Agent Scully style character is being played by Claire Bronson, who's a Atlanta-based talent that has been in everything. She's been in the more recent Rocky movies, and she's been in several other awesome projects. So she's an incredible talent right now, and I'm very happy to be working with her. So when we are up and running, we're going to be looking far and wide to find those special 3 kids.
Are there any other kind of specific things that you want to share about Joyriders or about just putting everything together and how this creation process has gone for you?
Yeah, one of the fun things that for those of you who end up following us on social media, you'll see that we're doing a lot of fan art. So we're basically making a bunch of posters based on 80s, 90s sci-fi and all other fantasy and other kinds of movie posters that you like that basically recast it. Imagine if these characters were black. So some of them are pretty funny. We did Back to the Future and The Labyrinth. Instead of David Bowie, we had Tina Turner and Janelle Monáe on the cover, which Tina Turner and David Bowie's hair from The Labyrinth, pretty similar.
That does line up, doesn't it?
It didn't take much effort. So there's like a Jurassic Park poster, there's a Jaws poster, there's a lot of great artwork, and we're actually having an art show at Carroll Street Cafe in Cabbagetown, which is a great place to hang out, and they are going to have our Joyriders art hanging for the month of May, all on their walls, so that's going to be a lot of fun. So we had a couple of other artists doing just concept art, fan art, like all kinds of random, beautiful art. If you're familiar with Hannah Fearman from the VHS series and a bunch of other awesome horror stuff, she's doing a piece as well. She's also an amazing artist. And it's going to be hanging up on the walls of Carroll Street Cafe for the month of May. And then the Seed and Spark thing, once that's good to go, people that are able to donate, we're going to have times for the people that have donated to come to set to see the amazing aliens that we're making, and participate in the process. So definitely check it out.
Yeah, you've got a lot of good stuff on here. Everything from the standard issue social media shout out up through posters for the movie, the soundtrack for the movie. To me, the screening and after party is very cool because to have the opportunity to see something like this on a big screen you know, you don't always get something like that. To be able to donate and support this project and then go and actually see it somewhere, as opposed to just getting your digital copy or whatever, that's very cool.
Yeah, definitely.
And then all the way up to associate and executive producer credits, which, you know, obviously you're immortalized as part of the process.
Absolutely. And I'm not precious with this process at all. So I am definitely interested in anyone and everyone's thoughts about the process. And like, I'm just not precious on it. You don't need to sign an NDA from me and all that stuff. I'll give away the farm, you know, because I'm passionate about this project, and we just trying to build up hype.
Yeah, I love that you're not secretive. You're like, this is so good, I'm just going to tell you what the story is because that's going to get you excited to see it, which is exactly what happened.
You know, especially so this is a proof of concept series. So we have once we finish this short version, it's basically the first act of a feature or the first episode of a series. So we have a series version of it and a feature version of it and we have connections in various places that we're going to be trying to sell it. So once we go and finish, have a product, you know, we'll be able to go into our next steps. But, you know, a lot of times people don't necessarily, like you say, get to see the film, especially if you're not local, you can't attend the screening or whatever. So I'm all about telling the story as it is, you know, and if somebody else wants to get inspired and do something similar, go have at it, because, you know, nobody owns Afrofuturism, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you bring up an interesting point there. You know, in this day and age, I would think there's probably not much that's pitched that's specifically intended, or at least not many original ideas that are specifically intended for feature or for series. Like, I feel like you've probably got to be adaptable now because you don't know what your eventual outlet's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you have to definitely have like a lot of different irons in the skillet, and the iron in the fire. However the hell you say that. Yeah, you gotta have a lot going on. And you know, there's a version of this story that is, you can't just make a movie, turn it into a series. You gotta have to like modify to make one work a little bit better in that. But if you have a good IP or you have a concept, and you do feel like it can go in either direction, it's worth going down the avenue to try and feel it out to see which way it goes, especially if you have multiple contacts in those different worlds, you know, TV and film.
Well, I think there's all kinds of awesome potential for this core concept here, and I'm excited to see what you do with it. Raymond, before we go, where can we find you online? Give us the sites, give us the details, Facebook, whatever. Although, as I mentioned before, Googling is very easy, people.
Yes, Googling is easy. You can check us out at, as you said, seedandspark.com/fun/Joyriders. You can also on Facebook, it's just Joyriders Movie. On Instagram, I'm the Ninja Puppet, and also joyridermovie.com. You know, I strongly recommend, if anybody's interested in this, go do the Facebook thing, because that's where I'm posting a lot of this fan art stuff, and it's just a lot of fun.
Well, and the Facebook is the easy central one, because that's the links to everything else important that's going on with it.
Exactly.
Awesome. Raymond Carr, thank you so much for coming on, talking about Joyriders, and I look forward to a full-length Raymond Carr interview at some point in the near future.
Anytime, my friend.
All right. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Needless Things podcast. You're the best. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Downcast, or in the ears of a Trader Vic's employee. Love you. Mean it. Uh-huh.